So much of the world's oceans remain unexplored. This means that you never quite know what you might discover when you take a look beneath the waves. On occasions, people find some truly unusual things, from fragments of spaceships to lost cities and strange formations. Let's take a look at 15 strange things found by deep-sea divers. Number 15. Apollo 11 engines. One of the ways that modern space companies are reducing costs is by designing their rockets to be reusable. That wasn't always the case, however, and the most powerful booster rockets ever built, that Saturn V's were designed to send the Apollo missions into orbit and beyond, were jettisoned once their fuel was used up and left to plummet back down to Earth in the ocean as far away from human civilization as possible, from where they sank deep into the ocean floor where they were all but forgotten. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and who has space exploration ambitions of his own, has always regarded these rockets as an important part of history, and in 2012, he launched an expedition to try to find them. Amazingly, sonar scans found debris in the exact part of the ocean where they were expected to be. And the following year, he was able to retrieve a series of decayed parts from a depth of around 14,000 feet. In the end, the team brought back enough to reconstruct 2 of the F1 engines. Because of the way the salt water has eroded the metal, it may prove impossible to know whether any of the pieces were part of the engines that took Apollo to the moon. Number 14. The Lost City. There have long been legends of lost cities that were once at the forefront of civilization but were ultimately consumed by the waves. And while many of these are believed to be merely stories, it certainly did happen on a number of occasions. Heraklion was a thriving port city in the ancient Egyptian Empire, located on the coast with the Mediterranean and handling most of the trade that came from Europe. But at some point around 2,200 years ago, rising sea levels are believed to have caused the ground it was built upon to become unstable, and it fell into the water. Over the following millennia, only a few mentions of the city survived, and researchers weren't sure whether the tales were even real, let alone where the city once stood. This all changed in 1933, however, when a British RAF pilot was flying over the Abu Qir Bay and noted that he saw what looked like ruins in the water. It would be another 60 years, though, before a team of divers would visit that site, and after 5 years of exploration, they finally found the ruins of the city, and what remains one of the greatest underwater archaeological discoveries ever made. With pottery, coins, and weapons having been retrieved, as well as countless remains of buildings, ships, temples, and other structures, there's now no doubt that this was Heraklion, and all the signs point to it having been a much more important city than anyone had previously imagined. Number 13. F4U Corsair Aircraft. During the Second World War, aircraft weren't anywhere near as reliable as they are today, and it wasn't too unusual for one to develop problems that resulted in it having to crash land and be abandoned. Of course, most planes during that time were lost to fighting, but there was one, an F4U Corsair, that took off from Hawaii a few years after the war had ended in 1948, and soon began to encounter difficulties. With the engine sputtering, the pilot had no choice but to make a gentle landing on the surface of the ocean, and amazingly, the plane didn't suffer any damage. The pilot was rescued, but it proved to be impossible to retrieve the craft from the water, so it was left to sink into oblivion. Stories of this crash still abounded, though, and several decades later, a team of divers went in search of it. To their surprise, it didn't take them very long to find what they were looking for, and they soon found themselves looking at a World War II fighter aircraft. The salt water hadn't been so kind to the plane, though, and a reef had begun to form around it, along with a large garden eel population. So rather than trying to lift it back to the surface, the decision was made to leave it, and it has instead become a popular dive site. At a depth of 115 feet or about 35 meters, it's considered to be an advanced dive that's made even more tricky by unpredictable currents. But it's an incredible piece of history that will likely remain there for the enjoyment of divers for many decades to come. Number 12. Crop circles. Crop circles are bizarre enough in the fields of farms around the world and have spawned countless theories of the work of aliens or of mischievous teenagers. But you can only imagine the surprise to divers off the coast of Japan and Australia, who in recent years have discovered what looks like crop circles in the sand of the seabed. Found at a range of depths from the shallows to 426 feet, they're made up of seemingly perfect circular concentric patterns. First discovered in Japan, it was a mystery as to how they got there for a number of years before a film crew managed to catch the culprit in action. It was one specific species of pufferfish that was responsible for them, and and the patterns formed in the sand were part of an elaborate courting ritual, whereby the larger, more complicated, and most perfect designs were the ones that won the affections of a mate. This species, though, isn't thought to live in the waters of Australia, so when patterns were found there too, it was almost as if the mystery had been opened up again. Marine biologists know this time, of course, that it's a behavior exhibited by at least one fish, so the race is now on to find out if there's another species that does the same thing. Number 11. Giant jellyfish. Based on those that are found washed up on beaches, it's easy to be under the impression that jellyfish only grow to a certain size. But the truth is that in the depths of the ocean, some species can become gigantic. And it's always a nervy but exciting ordeal for any deep-sea divers that encounter them. One of the largest species of all is the lion's mane jelly, which is native to the cooler waters in the Arctic, Atlantic, and northern Pacific Oceans. Often seen in the English Channel, the North Sea, the Irish Sea, the Baltic Sea, and around Scandinavia, they're also sometimes seen further afield, and it's usually these ones that reach monstrous proportions. The largest lion's mane jellyfish ever recorded was captured by an American scientist named Alexander Agassiz off the coast of Massachusetts in 1865. The bell of this specimen measured 7 feet, or just over 2 meters across, and its tentacles were around 120 feet, or 36 meters long. These are, of course, designed to trail deep in the waters to capture small morsels of food that are passing by. But they've also been known to tangle divers and can cause serious problems, especially if they're stung too. Lion's mane jellies aren't the only large species, though. While it's a phenomenon more associated with colder waters, it's just one of the many hazards that deep-sea divers have to constantly be on the lookout for. Number 10. An underwater river. We're all aware that beneath the surface of what looks like calm water, there's always the possibility that powerful currents are flowing. But in Mexico, there's a place where divers have discovered what appears to be an underwater river. The landscape of the country is covered in sinkholes and ancient cave systems that have since been flooded. The holes themselves are known as cenotes, which means sacred well in Mayan, because the civilization saw them as holy sites. And in recent times, they've become popular places for divers to explore because of the vast caverns and strange underwater structures that are there to be found. One of them, called the Angelita Cenote, which is near the ruins of the Mayan city of Tulum, has become of particular interest. At the surface, the 200-foot or 61-meter-wide pool seems to appear out of nowhere amidst the dense jungle. But things get even stranger the deeper you go. Near the bottom of the pit, it looks as if there's a river flowing across, and while it isn't actually the case, it brings attention to an unusual phenomenon. The effect is caused by the cenote having a number of different water sources, which each have varying levels of salinity. Instead of blending with the surrounding water, this particularly dense water falls to the bottom and begins to behave independently. Number 9. SS City of Cairo. The SS City of Cairo was a 449-foot or about a 137-meter-long vessel that was originally built in 1915 to be used as a passenger ship. By the time the Second World War had begun, though, it was commandeered to help transport supplies to the UK. And on a fateful voyage in 1942, after departing Cape Town in South Africa, she was torpedoed by a German U-boat and sank in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Of the 311 people that had been on board at the time, 207 survived and were ultimately rescued, while the remainder died either during the attack or because of the time it took for the rescue ships to arrive on scene. None of the cargo was salvaged, though, and since the ship was carrying 2,000 boxes of silver coins as well as various supplies and weaponry, it's long been a target for ocean salvage companies. History had almost completely forgotten about the ship when in 2015 it was announced that Deep Sea Exploration Team had actually managed to find the wreckage a few years earlier. It was lying on the seabed at a depth of 17,000 feet, or about 5,100 meters, which is far deeper than a person can swim, but within the range of submersible robots. By the time the discovery was announced, the crew had already managed to retrieve $46 million worth of silver coins, and the total salvaged assets are expected to have risen to around $60 million, which makes it the most valuable deep-sea salvage operation to have ever been undertaken. Number 8. Bimini Road. In September of 1968, a group of divers were swimming in about 18 feet of water off the coast of North Bimini Island in the Bahamas when they noticed something very unusual beneath them. What at first appeared to be a rock formation was beginning to look much more like a pathway or road that had been made out of carefully cut pieces of stone that had been arranged in a half-mile long stretch. The question that's baffled everyone since is whether this truly was something created by people, in which case why would they build something like that there? And it does indicate a lost civilization. Or could something that seems so rectangular have simply been made by the forces of nature? Since the original discovery, countless teams have conducted their own investigations at the site, employing various scientific techniques to try to understand what it is. There are still some groups to this day who remain convinced that the formation could only have taken on this structure if it was placed there by someone on purpose. But the general consensus is that it's a natural feature made up of pieces of beach rock that cracked and formed sharp edges as it fell from the island into the water. Number 7. Human skull. When you're diving in water, you can expect to see all sorts of pieces of garbage, detritus, and even the remains of various animals. But in 2007, while exploring a cave network in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, a team came across something that would startle even the most experienced of divers: a child's skull. The area where they had found it was littered with ancient artifacts, so they knew they hadn't inadvertently discovered evidence of a recent crime, and the decision was made to leave the skull, along with other bones, where they were. Unfortunately, subsequent divers began to move objects around at the site, so a couple of years later the remains were removed so they could be studied and preserved. It soon transpired that this was one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the Americas, and provided information of what the first settlers on the continent were like. Found to be the remains of a young girl who's now referred to as Naya, it is thought she would have been in her mid-teens and lived in the region around 12,000 years ago. With signs of malnutrition and stress, as well as having been pregnant before her death, which is likely caused by falling into the pit where she was found, her remains paint a picture of a hard life being experienced by those first people. Number 6. MS Zenobia. Built in 1979, the MS Zenobia was a Challenger-class ferry designed to carry passengers and cargo over routes throughout the Mediterranean. Something had gone terribly wrong in construction, however, and her maiden voyage in mid-1980 would be her last. Laden with 104 tractor-trailers and a full crew complement, the ship sailed into the Mediterranean past Gibraltar and made the first stop at Heraklion in Crete. After unloading some of the cargo, she then proceeded towards Athens, and it was then that the captain started noticing issues with the steering. As soon as he began to try to compensate for this, the ship started listing to its port side, and it was found that this was happening because the ballast tanks weren't filling up correctly. Seemingly having fixed the issue, the ship continued on its route, but later on in the journey, after leaving a port in Cyprus, the issue began again, and this time, after being moored out at sea to prevent her from blocking the port, she sank. Luckily, the crew had been evacuated before this happened, so no one was injured, but the ship and its estimated $250 million worth of cargo sank 138 feet beneath the waves. While the exact location of the sinking has always been known, it was a few years before the first team of divers went to explore the site, and they couldn't believe what they were seeing. With the ability to actually enter the superstructure of the ship and explore the lower car deck and the engine room, they reported back their findings, and it's since become regularly ranked as one of the 10 best recreational dive sites in the world, with thousands visiting each year. Number 5. Ancient Mine. The cenotes in Mexico have regularly turned up surprising discoveries, such as artifacts from ancient civilizations. But a team of divers found something in 2017 that's completely rewritten the history books and fundamentally changed what we thought we knew about how the first cultures in the region lived. The caves haven't always been flooded, and that's why skeletons and objects are often found deep within them. But the latest find in a cenote along the eastern coast of Quintana Roo is very different. The divers realized that the caves they were swimming through didn't look the same as the others they had explored, and the only reason for this was that they had been altered in some way by prehistoric humans when the caves were accessible. Further investigation suggests that these ancient people likely used the site as a mine from which they extracted tons of ochre, and probably set up campfires along the route to illuminate the space. With objects such as tools, extraction beds, the markers have been found. It's now believed the cave was used as a mine for 2,000 years, with work beginning around 12,000 years ago. This makes it the earliest known mine in the whole of the Americas and suggests people were digging the ground for useful materials many thousands of years earlier than had previously been thought. Number 4. The Ghost Fleet of Truk Lagoon. The Second World War saw battles breaking out around the entire globe, and things soon became as intense in the Pacific region as they were in Europe, where hostilities had started. The Empire of Japan's main naval base was in a place called Truk Lagoon, which is around 1,100 miles to the northeast of New Guinea. And Allied forces knew that if they wanted to deal a substantive blow to the enemy, this would be the place to do it. In 1944, after capturing the Marshall Islands, the American-led Operation Hailstone began, which saw a 3-day assault launched from aircraft carriers against the fortification and resulted in the destruction of 12 Japanese warships, 32 merchant ships, and 275 aircraft. In that single campaign, the lagoon became known as the single largest graveyard of ships in the world. And as a remnant of the war, it was forgotten about, and for 20 years no one returned. In 1969, though, Jacques Cousteau and his team arrived at the lagoon to explore the site and filmed a documentary showing just how mystical, ghostly, and alluring the wrecks are. Submerged in virtually crystal clear water, some are only 49 feet beneath the surface and are easily accessible. You can still see the remains of vehicles and equipment that were on board the ships during the attack. And one of the most important discoveries was that of I-169 Shinohara, a submarine that caused extensive damage during the assault on Pearl Harbor. Number 3. Manganese nodules. With so little of the world's ocean floors having been explored, there's a mystery that's been regularly discovered by deep-sea divers that's becoming increasingly strange, and still there's no fully accepted explanation. From the shallowest regions to the deepest depths, the seabed appears to be covered with objects called manganese nodules, which are made up of concentric layers of iron and manganese oxides. Varying in size between virtually microscopic to more than 8 inches, they're mainly a similar size to a chicken's egg. The surprising thing about them, though, is their sheer prevalence. It's thought that they cover at least 70% of the ocean bed, which makes it even more bizarre that we don't understand the process that creates them. Even so, mining companies are looking at them with interest because it may not be long until it's economically viable to trawl the oceans to collect these nodules to process. Number 2. The Caesarea Sunken Treasure. Everyone's dreamed of one day finding hidden treasure of their own. But while it's a rare occurrence, it does typically happen. In February of 2015, Zvika Thayer was diving in the water off the coast of Caesarea, an Israeli port, and noticed something shiny in the sand below. He reached down to grab it and found that it was a gold coin with Arabic script written onto it. As he pushed more sand aside, he kept finding more coins and realized he needed to report the discovery to authorities. Believed to have been the cargo of a ship traveling through the region that is thought to have been sunk by a storm, more than 2,000 coins have now been recovered, each of which is more than 95% pure 24-karat gold. They are at least 1,000 years old. What's truly unusual is that despite their age, the writing on the coins is still legible, and this is probably because of the unique combination of temperature and salinity of the water in that part of the Mediterranean. Had it been anywhere else, they would have more than likely decayed beyond recognition. Number 1. The Baltic Sea Anomaly. Possibly the strangest thing found by deep-sea divers is known as the Baltic Sea Anomaly, something that continues to divide experts as to whether it's a natural formation or could potentially have extraterrestrial origins. In 2011, a Swedish exploration team was scanning the floor of the Baltic Sea when they took images that appeared to show a 200-foot circular object with what looked like ramps and staircases around it. Straight away, they sent the images to experts around the world to try to understand what it was, and theories soon began circulating that the team had discovered a crashed UFO. With such an unusual shape, it's no surprise that people initially assumed that it must have been created by someone, because natural forces don't usually form straight or curved edges in that way. Despite the protests of those who wanted to believe, however, the scientific consensus is that it actually is a naturally occurring phenomenon. The Baltic Sea in particular is a place that has gone through a huge amount of glacial erosion throughout history, and is most likely a large piece of rock that was transported there by an ice flow, and that has been gradually smoothed by ice and ocean currents ever since. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.